The crack of gunfire echoed across the windswept plains as Cassidy Lawson ducked behind the overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The year was 1872, and the promise of a new life in Wyoming Territory had just erupted into chaos as surely as the dust devils that spun across the prairie. "Stay down," a deep voice commanded as a man slid beside her, his weather-worn face streaked with dirt and determination. Quentin Adams, the taciturn cowboy who'd reluctantly agreed to guide their wagon train, pressed a rifle into her trembling hands. "You know how to use this?" Cassidy nodded, her auburn hair escaping from its pins as she checked the chamber. Growing up with 4 brothers on the Illinois frontier had taught her plenty about survival, even if she'd spent the last 3 years teaching in a proper Boston schoolhouse. "Good," Quentin said, his eyes the exact shade of a summer storm meeting hers briefly before he turned back toward the sound of hoofbeats. "Because I'm thinking we're about to have company." 3 weeks earlier, Cassidy had never imagined she'd find herself in such dire circumstances. After her father's passing, the letter from her uncle in Paradise Valley had seemed like Providence, a teaching position in a growing settlement, fresh air away from Boston's cold-choked skies, and the chance to claim her own destiny. The journey west had begun with such hope, 20 wagons strong, families dreaming of new beginnings. Then came the fever. It swept through their party with merciless efficiency, claiming 7 lives, including her uncle's. The survivors had pressed on, but with dwindling supplies and spirits. And now, bandits, the worst kind of opportunists preying on vulnerable travelers. "They're circling back," someone shouted from another wagon. Quentin's jaw clenched beneath his stubbled skin. "When I give the word, you fire toward that ridge. Don't aim to hit anyone. Just keep their heads down." "What about you?" Cassidy asked. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. "I'm going to convince them we're not worth the trouble." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving low and fast between the scattered wagons. Cassidy took a steadying breath and positioned the rifle. She'd never shot at a human being before, and prayed today wouldn't be the first time. The standoff lasted another hour, shots exchanged, threats called across the rocky terrain, until finally the bandits retreated, apparently deciding that whatever supplies the travelers carried weren't worth the fight. As dusk fell, the reduced wagon train limped onward, desperate to reach the settlement before nightfall. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising another challenge to their beleaguered party. "Storm's coming," Quentin said, riding alongside Cassidy's wagon. She'd taken over driving after Mrs. Henderson, the wife of the wagon master, had succumbed to fever 3 days prior. "Bad one, by the look of it." "How far to Paradise Valley?" Cassidy asked, her hands raw from gripping the reins. "Too far to outrun that." He nodded toward the menacing wall of clouds. "There's a canyon ahead with some shelter. We'll have to wait it out." The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they guided the wagons into the relative protection of a narrow canyon. Wind howled through the rock formations, carrying stinging rain that felt like needles against exposed skin. "Get the children into the wagons," Quentin shouted over the rising gale. "Secure everything that might blow away." Cassidy helped the Finch family with their 3 young children, then rushed to assist an elderly couple whose wagon canvas had begun to tear free. All around them, the storm intensified, transforming from mere rain to a deluge. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the canyon walls in stark relief before plunging them back into darkness. The creek's rising. Someone called out in panic. Cassidy turned to see water surging through the canyon floor, already lapping at the wagon wheels. "Higher ground." Now, Quentin's voice carried above the storm's fury. He appeared at Cassidy's side, soaked to the skin, his hat long since blown away. "Get everyone up that slope." The next hour passed in a blur of terror and desperate action. The water rose with frightening speed as the narrow canyon funneled the flash flood directly through their camp. 2 wagons were lost to the current, dragged away with all their contents. Miraculously, no lives were lost, though several people suffered injuries during the chaotic evacuation. By midnight, the surviving travelers huddled on a rocky ledge 30 feet above the raging torrent that had been a dry creek bed mere hours before. The rain continued unabated, and the temperature dropped precipitously. "We need shelter," Quentin said, gathering the remaining men. There's a cave system further up. Henderson, take 4 men and get the women and children there. He turned to Cassidy, who was helping splint a young man's broken arm. Miss Lawson, you go with them. What about the wagons? She asked, already knowing the answer from the grim set of his mouth. Whatever we can salvage, we will, he said. But not until this water recedes. Cassidy shook her head. I'll stay and help. This isn't the time for Mr. Adams, she cut him off firmly. I've tended to injuries before, and you have at least 3 men who need care. I'm staying. Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or simply resignation. Fine, but stay clear of the edge. The storm raged through the night, a relentless assault that seemed determined to scour them from the face of the earth. Huddled beneath a meager overhang of rock, Cassidy worked alongside Quentin to create a windbreak using saddles, broken wagon parts, and anything else they could secure. The injured men lay behind this makeshift barrier, protected somewhat from the worst of the elements. How did you learn to do all this? Cassidy asked as she watched Quentin reinforce their shelter, his movements efficient despite his obvious exhaustion. 3 years scouting for the cavalry, he replied without looking up. 2 years trapping in Montana Territory. You learn quick or you don't survive to learn at all. And now you guide wagon trains? He paused, and in the brief flash of lightning, she caught a glimpse of something haunted in his eyes. Seemed like a way to do some good. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, though the flood waters remained dangerous. Their situation was dire, half their wagons gone, supplies scattered or ruined, and Paradise Valley still 2 days' journey away. We'll need to send riders for help, Henderson said, his face gray with fatigue and worry. The settlement can send wagons, supplies. Quentin nodded. I'll go. I know the fastest route. I'll accompany you, Cassidy said, surprising herself as much as the men around her. Miss Lawson, Henderson began, but she raised a hand to stop him. I'm the lightest rider here, and I don't have family to care for, she said firmly. The faster you get help, the better for everyone. Quentin studied her for a long moment before giving a curt nod. We leave in an hour. Pack only what's essential. They set out as the clouds began to break, patches of blue appearing between the gray. Cassidy rode astride, scandalous by Boston standards, but practical for the journey ahead, on a mare borrowed from the Wilkins family. Quentin led on his own horse, a muscular chestnut gelding that seemed as stoic as its master. We'll follow the ridge, he explained as they picked their way through debris left by the flood. It's longer but safer than cutting through the lowlands. They'll still be underwater. How did you become a guide? Cassidy asked after they'd ridden in silence for nearly an hour. Quentin glanced back at her. You ask a lot of questions. I'm a teacher. It's an occupational hazard. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough. He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer, but finally he spoke. I came west after the war. Didn't fit anywhere back home in Pennsylvania. You fought for the Union? 3 years with the 83rd Pennsylvania. Gettysburg. The Wilderness. Cold Harbor. He named the battles like waypoints on a map, each one heavy with unspoken meaning. After that, cities felt confining. Cassidy nodded, understanding more than he might have guessed. My brother Thomas came back different, too. He lives alone now, trapping in Minnesota. Can't stand to be around people for long. They rode another mile before Quentin asked, Why did you leave Boston? Teaching seems a respectable profession for a woman. It is, she agreed. But I was teaching other people's children to chase other people's dreams. I wanted something of my own. She looked out across the vast landscape, still beautiful despite the destruction wrought by the storm. My father always said I had more wanderlust than was proper for a lady. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. The past tense hung between them, acknowledgement of shared understanding. They made camp that evening on high ground, with a clear view of the surrounding territory. The night was cold but clear, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across black velvet. They shared a meager meal of jerky and hardtack, sitting close to their small fire. Tell me about Paradise Valley, Cassidy said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. What kind of place is it? Quentin added a few sticks to the fire. Growing. Not as fast as some settlements, but steadily. Good people mostly. They've built a proper school, which is why your uncle sent for you, I expect. And is there a place for someone like you there? He looked up, surprised by the perceptive question. I don't stay in one place long. Ever. Not in recent memory. Cassidy considered this. That sounds lonely. It's simpler. Simpler isn't always better. His eyes met hers across the fire, and for a moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "Get some sleep, Miss Lawson. We'll start at first light." They reached Paradise Valley by mid-afternoon the next day, a collection of sturdy buildings nestled in a verdant valley that had somehow escaped the worst of the storm's fury. The settlement's leaders mobilized immediately, organizing wagons and supplies to rescue the stranded travelers. "You should rest," Cassidy told Quentin as men loaded wagons with blankets, food, and medicine. "You've barely slept in 2 days." "I'll rest when everyone's safe," he replied, checking the cinch on a fresh horse. "I know exactly where they are. These men don't." "Then I'm coming with you." He shook his head. "You've done your part. Stay here, get settled." "Mr. Adams," she said firmly, "those people are my responsibility too." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "Stubborn woman." "So I've been told." The rescue party departed within the hour, 6 wagons strong, with Quentin and Cassidy leading the way. They reached the stranded travelers by nightfall, finding them cold and hungry, but alive. The reunion was emotional relief and gratitude flowing freely as supplies were distributed and the injured were tended to. "You did it." Henderson clasped Quentin's hand, his voice rough with emotion. "Brought help just in time." Quentin nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. "Miss Lawson deserves as much credit." By the time they returned to Paradise Valley 2 days later, word of their ordeal had spread throughout the settlement. The survivors were welcomed with open arms, housed with local families until they could rebuild their lives. Cassidy found herself assigned temporary quarters above the Mercantile, the school having been damaged in the storm. "It needs repairs before classes can begin," explained Mrs. Porter, the mayor's wife, as she showed Cassidy the small but neat room. "But you'll be comfortable here in the meantime." "Thank you," Cassidy said sincerely. "Everyone has been so kind. That's how we survive out here." Mrs. Porter smiled. "Together." She hesitated, then added, "Your guide, Mr. Adams, he's quite the hero, bringing you all through that terrible storm." Cassidy nodded. "He is, though I doubt he'd agree with the term. Men like that rarely do." Mrs. Porter's eyes twinkled knowingly. "He's staying on, you know. Hired by Mr. Donovan to help rebuild the school. Says he knows something about carpentry." This was news to Cassidy. "I thought he never stayed in one place long." "Well," Mrs. Porter said with a meaningful smile, "perhaps he's found a reason to reconsider." Over the following weeks, Paradise Valley began to recover from the storm's devastation. Fields were replanted, buildings repaired, and the rhythm of daily life gradually resumed. Cassidy threw herself into helping wherever she could, assisting with the school repairs by day and teaching informal classes in the church by evening. She saw Quentin frequently, usually from a distance as he worked on rebuilding the schoolhouse. Occasionally their paths would cross in town, and they'd exchange polite greetings that somehow never seemed adequate for what they'd experienced together. One evening, as Cassidy was returning from teaching, she found him sitting on the steps of the Mercantile, whittling what appeared to be a small wooden horse. "Miss Lawson," he nodded, setting aside his work. "Mr. Adams," she replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after a long day. "The school is looking wonderful. Thank you for your work. Should be finished by month's end," he said, rising to his feet. "I hear you've been teaching in the church meantime." "Yes, though the acoustics leave something to be desired." The youngest children's voices echo something terrible during recitation. A smile tugged at his lips. "I can imagine." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. "Would you," he began, just as she said, "I was wondering." They both stopped, and Cassidy laughed softly. "Please, you first." Quentin cleared his throat. "Would you allow me to escort you to the Founders' Day celebration this Saturday? If you're not otherwise engaged, that is." Her heart quickened. "I would like that very much." "Good," he nodded, looking both pleased and slightly bewildered by his own boldness. "That's good." The Founders' Day celebration transformed Paradise Valley's town square into a festival of lights, music, and community pride. Lanterns hung from every available post, tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, and a small band of local musicians filled the evening air with lively tunes. Cassidy wore her best dress, a deep green that brought out the copper highlights in her hair, and felt a flutter of anticipation as Quentin arrived to escort her, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt beneath his usual vest. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. "Thank you," she replied, taking it. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Adams." The evening unfolded in a pleasant haze of introductions, conversations, and shared laughter. Quentin, though still reserved by nature, seemed more at ease than Cassidy had ever seen him, particularly when describing their harrowing journey to fascinated listeners. "And then Miss Lawson here," he recounted to the blacksmith, and his wife insisted on riding for help, despite having traveled for weeks already. "Toughest woman I've ever met. Necessity brings out unexpected qualities in all of us," Cassidy demurred, though she was secretly pleased by his praise. Later, as the music slowed and couples began to dance beneath the stars, Quentin hesitated, then offered his hand. "I'm not much of a dancer," he admitted, "but if you're willing to risk your toes." Cassidy smiled and placed her hand in his. "I believe I've faced worse dangers in your company, Mr. Adams." His hand rested lightly at her waist as they moved to the gentle rhythm of the waltz. Despite his disclaimer, he danced with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. "You've surprised me," she said after a while. "How so?" "You're still here. I had the impression you never stayed anywhere for long." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes finding hers in the lantern light. "Some things are worth reconsidering old habits for." The schoolhouse was completed by the end of June, a sturdy structure with large windows to capture the precious daylight and a bell tower that could be heard throughout the valley. The day before its official opening, Quentin gave Cassidy a private tour. "The desks arrive tomorrow," he explained, leading her through the main room. "Ordered all the way from Denver. And there's something else I wanted to show you." He guided her to a small side room. "Thought you might need an office. For books and private conferences and such." Cassidy stepped into the space, amazed by the built-in shelves and the simple but elegant desk positioned beneath a window that framed the valley perfectly. "Quentin, this is wonderful," she breathed, running her hand along the smooth wood of the desk. "I never expected. This wasn't in the plans." "Took some liberties," he admitted, watching her reaction carefully. "Hoped you wouldn't mind." She turned to him, eyes bright with emotion. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building since that night by the campfire. "Cassidy," he said softly, her given name sounding different in his voice. "I'm not a man of fancy words. Never have been. But these past weeks—" He paused, searching for the right way to continue. "I've been thinking about what you said, about simple not always being better." She held her breath, afraid to break the moment. "I've spent years keeping my distance from people, from places," he continued. "After the war, it seemed safer that way. But then that storm hit, and I found myself building walls to protect others instead of to keep them out." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and honest. "Particularly one very stubborn schoolteacher who refuses to do as she's told." Cassidy smiled, her heart racing. "Perhaps that schoolteacher sees something in you that you've forgotten was there." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "And what might that be?" "A good man," she said simply. "A man worth knowing. Worth—" She hesitated, then found her courage. "Worth loving." The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, tentative, as though he feared she might disappear if he moved too quickly. Then, as her arms slipped around his neck, it deepened into something more certain, a promise exchanged without words. Summer faded into a glorious autumn, the valley ablaze with color as the aspen trees turned gold against the evergreen backdrop. The school flourished under Cassidy's care, growing from 12 students to 20 by October. Quentin, to everyone's surprise including his own, accepted a position as the settlement's marshal after the previous one retired. "Never thought I'd wear a badge again," he confessed to Cassidy one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse. "Not after the war." "Does it trouble you?" she asked, her hand warm in his. He considered this. "Less than I expected. Feels different, protecting a community you care about." "A community you're part of," she corrected gently. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. "That's your doing, you know." Before you, I was just passing through life. Now, he stopped walking and turned to face her. Now I'm living it. The proposal came that same evening, not with grand gestures, but with heartfelt simplicity. A gold ring that had belonged to his mother, words spoken plainly but with deep emotion, and a question that Cassidy answered through happy tears. They were married as the first snow-dusted Paradise Valley, a small ceremony in the church where Cassidy had taught those first weeks. The entire settlement attended, bearing gifts and well wishes for the couple who had come to represent something important to them all: resilience, hope, and the power of choosing to build rather than to wander. "Never thought I'd see the day," Henderson told Quentin at the reception. "You settling down, wearing a badge, getting hitched. That storm changed more than just our travel plans." Quentin watched as Cassidy laughed with a group of her students across the room. "Some forces of nature you can't outride," he said. "And some walls are meant to be torn down, not built up." Their first home was modest but well-crafted, a cabin on the edge of town with a view of both the mountains and the settlement. Quentin built most of it himself, with help from neighbors during barn-raising-style gatherings that culminated in shared meals and music beneath the stars. Inside, Cassidy created a haven of warmth and learning, with bookshelves lining one wall and comfortable furnishings arranged to encourage conversation. They hosted regular Sunday dinners for those without family nearby, particularly the young men who reminded Quentin of himself not so long ago: rootless, searching, in need of connection even if they wouldn't admit it. The second spring after their marriage brought the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Cassidy's mother. The tiny girl with Quentin's storm-gray eyes and Cassidy's determined spirit became the center of their world, turning their partnership into a family. "She has your stubbornness," Quentin observed one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset while their daughter slept inside. "God help us all when she's old enough to argue." Cassidy laughed and leaned against his shoulder. "And she has your watchfulness. Nothing escapes her notice." "Poor child, cursed with our worst traits." "Our best, I'd say." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "The traits that brought us through that storm. That built this life." He brought her hand to his lips. "I used to think surviving meant staying apart from people, keeping moving so nothing could touch you. And now," he looked at their entwined hands, the simple gold bands catching the last light of day. "Now I know it's the opposite. We survive because of what we build together. The walls that matter are the ones we create to shelter each other, not separate us." 5 years to the day after that devastating storm swept through the valley, Paradise Settlement, now officially Paradise Town, dedicated its new community hall. Built of local stone and timber, designed to withstand whatever nature might throw at it, the hall stood as a testament to the town's growth and resilience. As town marshal and school headmistress respectively, Quentin and Cassidy Adams stood front and center at the dedication ceremony. Their daughter Elizabeth, now 4, squirmed between them, while their infant son James slept in Cassidy's arms, oblivious to the significance of the moment. Mayor Donovan's speech acknowledged the journey that had brought them all to this point. 5 years ago, a storm tore through our valley with such fury we feared it might wash away everything we had built, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. But instead, it brought us together, showed us what we were made of, and brought us some of our finest citizens. He nodded toward Quentin and Cassidy. A reluctant hero who built a wall with his back and stubbornness alone to protect strangers from nature's wrath. A determined teacher who refused to let adversity derail her purpose. Together, they embody the spirit that has helped our community not just survive, but thrive. Later, as twilight settled over the celebration and lanterns were lit around the new hall, Quentin pulled Cassidy away from the crowd for a moment of quiet. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they watched the townspeople dancing and laughing in the gathering dusk. "Completely," she answered without hesitation. "Though I must admit, when I first set out for Paradise Valley, this isn't quite what I imagined finding." "Oh, and what did you imagine?" She smiled, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw, now softened slightly by contentment, though still bearing the strength that had first drawn her to him. "A teaching position, independence, adventure, perhaps. And instead you got a stubborn ex-soldier with more scars than sense." "I got a home," she corrected him gently. a purpose larger than myself. A love story written in storm clouds and hard work and second chances. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him softly. I got everything I never knew to wish for. Around them, Paradise Valley settled into evening secure, hopeful, alive with possibility. The storm that had once threatened to destroy it had instead become part of its foundation myth, a reminder that sometimes the most devastating forces bring with them unexpected gifts. For Cassidy and Quentin Adams, that truth was written in every aspect of the life they'd built, a life neither had believed possible until they found themselves standing together, backs to the wind, facing down nature's fury with nothing but stubborn determination and the first fragile threads of what would become an unbreakable bond. "Come on," Quentin said, taking her hand. "They're playing our song." As they rejoined the celebration, moving together to the familiar waltz under stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family, Cassidy thought about the unpredictable paths that shape a life. How a storm, a chance meeting, a moment of courage can change everything. How walls built for protection can become foundations for something greater. And how sometimes love arrives not with poetry and promises, but with calloused hands and quiet strength, building shelter in the heart of the tempest, creating home where once there was only wilderness.